Hi, everyone, and welcome to a new session with Code with Sally. The session run usually every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm happy to have everyone today with me in the session, and if you're watching it online on YouTube, I'm happy to have you as well. If anyone missed the previous sessions, I encourage you to go to YouTube, Code with Sally, and subscribe to the channel. So if any new video is uploaded, you get notified. You will find that the previous sessions are uploaded oldest to newest. They are all currently in the beginner sessions. So if you missed the previous sessions about unit testing, it would be great if you watch them first because it will give you the base or the background that you need so you can follow up with the topic we have today. So in the past or the previous sessions, we discussed and explained what are unit tests, how they are used, why do we need them, how they are critical for code coverage. Is code coverage is enough, or we need to do testing and assert statements to make sure everything is working, because sometimes people tend to do and focus on the code coverage and forget about the test cases and actually testing the code. So we explained all of that, and we explained how we write the test classes, how we can prepare the data in the test methods versus using test setup, test data factory. So it's everything like we discussed in the previous sessions. We will try today to highlight some points we touch base upon in the previous sessions without digging deeper in them. And because they are quite important to understand, we'll try to explain them. But the basic of how to write the test classes is covered in the previous sessions, from using is-test setup, how to create the test method, how to prepare the data, how to consume the test we are trying to run or the functionality we are trying to test, and the most important part, the asserts, and the difference between system.assert or the assert class and why we tend to use it now more. So today, while we are working in the previous sessions, we talked about positive and negative testing. So we want to touch base on them again and explain what's the difference between positive and negative testing again, especially some people send me the homework from previous session that we shared, and I noticed some issues on how to write the test method for the negative scenario. So I want to go through it again because it's very important to understand and to master how to think about it and how to write. The second topic will be the Test.startTest and Test.stopTest. We used it in the contact testing class, I believe. And we said at the time, make sure that the portion of the code you want to test is called within the start test and stop test. And then we said we'll explain later why we need it or why it's a good idea to use it. So today we'll explain it a bit, but we'll see it again in the future in advanced session, how it can be used and how it's very useful for asynchronous APIs. The last one that to be honest, I didn't have the plan initially to include it in the sessions is the run-as, system.runAs, and how we can run the test class as different type of users. I had a question last session from one of the attendees, so that's why I want to cover it in the session. But if it's a bit complex or if you feel like it's overwhelming for you, don't worry. It's a more advanced topic. So take an idea about it, understand it a bit, but keep it. We can talk about it again in the future if it's still not clear. So let's start with the first topic. So we have positive and negative testing. So we want to understand what's the difference between them. So when we think about testing scenarios, and that will apply even for QAs. So when you have a system and you want to test it, you have two ways of thinking. One way is that you want to do the happy scenario. The happy scenario or the positive testing is when you enter valid data and you are testing that the system with the valid data will behave the way you are expecting, and it will give you the correct output based on the correct input you gave. So it's the happy scenario, happy pass, you are entering good data and it should work and give you the output you are expecting. So that's the first set of testing that we usually like try to write when we are writing even the test classes, not just for QAs. Like you want to test the positive testing or the happy scenario. So for example, if you have an application or a method function that is creating orders and it takes, for example, product ID, quantity, and the account related to this order, if you are passing all the data, we are expecting that the record will be created and the order will be inserted in the database. So that's the happy scenario. The second type of testing or scenarios, even QAs, like when they are testing scenario, it's how to break the system or how to try different edge cases, which is not the normal or the expected or the happy scenario. What we mean with that is that we want to try invalid data, try to perform an action with missing values and see how it will behave. Because we explained before, like if you have an exception that is not handled, that's called unhandled exception, and it can return a message that sometimes it's ugly a bit to the user to see, and the user, or maybe some extra details that you don't want to show it to them. So it's a good idea when you're writing your code to think about the validations, the scenarios, the exceptions that you want to give to the user. Let's say if they are trying to create an order and they are missing the product ID, you want to, instead of giving them DML exception, we may need to tell them, okay, you're missing the product ID, it's a required field. So things like that. So the negative testing, it ensures that your system or your action, like the testing method, like the testing code or the code you are trying to test, is behaving the way you are expecting in case of invalid or unexpected inputs. Like let's say quantity, you're expecting to be greater than 0, and you enter that I want an order with negative 10 pieces. That doesn't make sense. So in that case, that's a negative scenario that we want to test. So that's a brief description on what is the positive and the negative testing scenario. So let's go together. I have prepared for you here. It's order utility. We want to check order utility now together. So I have here prepared, again, because of the session is short and like we don't have longer sessions and we want to cover a lot. So I tried to prepare for you simpler examples. It doesn't have to be 100% with the same complexity of real life scenarios, because the focus here is to think about what is positive and negative scenarios and how to think about. So here we created a static method that will create an order. It is expecting product ID, quantity, and account ID. So here we are passing or checking first that if the product ID is empty, we'll throw an exception that it's product ID is required. If the quantity is null or negative, we'll give an error that we want the quantity greater than 0. If those two checks pass, then we'll create the order and insert it and return the order to the user. That's how this function is built. So let me open first the developer console here. So if you remember, we said like the static methods will be called with the class name. So here I'm calling it. And let's say I enter null for the product. I want 2, and I want null for the account. So, and I will return here an order object, and I will print it system.debug, and I do here order object.id. So let's see together. When I will execute now, that variable does not exist, line 2. Okay, I wrote it wrong. Yeah, here was missing the R. So order object, okay. So let's run it. Here it gives me the illegal argument exception, and it tells me the nice message that I said, product ID is required. Let's say I will pass an ID here, 1, 2, 3. So I'm passing a valid product. So the exception here won't occur. The quantity is greater than 0. Again, we can try it here, negative. It will give me an exception. Quantity must be greater than 0. But let's say I will do here, everything is good, but the account is null. Here, that's what we are talking about. It's unhandled exception. Like we have here, insert first exception on row 0, first error, required field missing, select an account. So here, this error is not nice. So that's in general something you need to consider, like when you are building even your class or your code, you have to think about the different like edge cases and how you want it to behave, because you want your code to be nice and handled nicely. So that would tell me, for example, that I need to add an extra check here. So if ID is null, the account ID is null, I say account ID is required. So you remember the ugly message we got? We replace it with account ID is required. So let's try it now from the developer console. So here I will do. Now I got illegal argument exception and I got simpler message saying account ID is required. So that's how we should be thinking while we are coding. If there is certain values, certain checks we need to do, we need to handle it nicely in our code so the user doesn't get like unhandled exceptions or ugly long messages or confusing messages. So by looking into this code, if we want to think about positive and negative scenarios, like what can we think about? Like, or what are the options? So we said for the positive, it's something we have to, it's the happy past. So the happy past in this scenario is what? The happy past in this scenario is valid product ID and valid quantity, and account ID. And when I put the happy scenario, I'm expecting order to be created. So that's one positive. We can try different positive by different quantities, different accounts, different products, but this idea will be the same. So the second portion of the types we discussed is the negative testing. So the negative testing, we said like invalid data and handling exceptions. So here we have the method is we are passing 3 variables: product, quantity, and ID. So that tells me I have -1 and I will have -2 and -3 because each of them I'd be passing a different like options or invalid data. So -1 would be invalid product ID, invalid product ID, ID. Here, number 2, it will be invalid product ID, but invalid quantity. The third will be valid product ID and quantity, but invalid account ID. So that's something like I encourage you to think about even before starting the test classes. Like here, we didn't even go to the test classes or thought about it. Like we are thinking this only, even you can do it on a piece of paper while you are developing, because that will help you visualize what are the type of scenarios or edge cases or validations for inputs that you need to do. And that help us, for example, with those 3 checks. So that's conclude here the order utility. We want to start writing like the positive and negative scenarios. So I put here the ones that we thought about together. 1, 2, and this is the third. And we can work on it together. So first of all, here we have a test setup, because we need to create accounts sometimes. like especially in the positive, we need the valid account, -1, -2, we can have a valid account. So I have here a test setup where I called it like prepare data. And then I created the account and I inserted. Again, this can be moved to test data factory, because maybe more than one test class will need to create an account. But yeah, let's go here to the positive. So that here will cover the first scenario. I want to do the positive. I want to have like valid ID, product ID, quantity, and account. So for the account, we got selected the account, and that's how like the test method, we mark it as test setup first. Then we are preparing the data here because we created the account in the test data factory. We are selecting it. Then we are setting an ID and a quantity that is greater than 0. So we know that we are preparing 3 inputs, valid inputs. Then here, the next step is call the code we want to test. So here, it's the create order in the order utility, and we are passing product ID, quantity, and account ID. Then, after calling this, we want to do the assert. So the assert, this is where it will help us validate that the order got inserted and it got inserted with the right data. So what we did here is based on the result, we used the ID to return the account or the order, sorry, that we just inserted. And we started checking with the assert class, assert.isNotNull, assert are equal, one by one, checking that there is an order. Here, checking that the order ID matched the ID we passed. The quantity is the same. Here, I know in the order utility, we are setting the status by default to draft. So here we are checking that the value is draft as well. And finally, the account ID. So let's see it together in action. I'll go here, new run, and order utility test, and I will execute it. So here we'll see that it passed. So that tells me that the positive or the happy scenario I have passed with no issues. Second one, we want like to try together to write one of the negative methods. Here, what we want to do is we want to give it a like a name. And we want to do the is test method, the first thing. Then we want to have the signature of the method. So it's a static method, void, and we'll give it a name. So let's say I will name it here order missing product ID, because that's the scenario I want to test. And then I will prepare the data. So we said to prepare the data, I would have maybe an integer quantity 5, and I can have the account here, the same account we created. So I have account and quantity as valid, and then I will try to call the order, create order. So let's do it here together. I will do here, take this, and I will pass, instead of the product ID, I will pass null. I want to try it's empty. Then I pass the quantity and account ID. Let's try here together. And let's see how we should think about the negative testing. So here I'm trying a negative testing scenario. So what is my expectation? Let me focus on even on this one. Now it failed. Is it supposed to fail the test method in the negative? No, it should behave the way we want. But here it behaved the way we want, but we didn't handle it right in the test class, because here it returned an error, the exception that is product ID is required, which is expected. Like I don't want it to pass and create the order. I'm the one here who's writing product ID is null. then give me this exception. But the way I'm handling here in the test method is the one that is missing something. So I know when I will call the create order that there is an exception. So when we do that, I need to do a try and catch. So here I will do a try and then a catch. I can catch even the illegal argument assignment, exception, sorry, because I know that's the type of the exception I'm passing. In the try, I will call the method or that we are trying to test, which is create order. I know because I have a null, I'm expecting it to throw me an exception. That's what happened. So here I need to check that the exception that returned the message that I set in the code, and that tells me it passed. So here I would say assert.r equal. So that's to give me to check the equality. I'm saying that I'm expecting the error message to be product ID is required. And I'm checking this against the message that is returned from the exception. If that right, it should pass. So we just did that without the try and catch, and it failed. Now let's try it again. So order utility, and I will have missing product ID. And now see, it passed. So now I'm handling the exception correct. Like I know my expectation for this negative scenario that there is an exception. So I have to handle the exception correctly, and I have to check or assert here that the error message that I'm expecting is correct. Someone would say, okay, yeah, we are done this scenario. I would say something is missing, and let me show you why. Now I have here a simple, instead of throwing an exception, maybe someone else in the project, another developer decided to say, okay, why would we give an exception? Let me give it the dummy like product ID if it's empty. I put 1, 2, 3, 4. And I thought that this is right, but this is wrong, and you know this is wrong. Now, when we run the code here, the same testing scenario for the missing product ID, unfortunately, it will pass because there is no exception. And like what happened here, that the create order went, and then we had empty product ID, we put it, then the quantity is valid, account ID is valid. So what happened that the order got inserted, and that's why the exception or the catch didn't get executed. But is this the right behavior? No, the right behavior, we wanted to enforce that there is an exception return, and the developer who changed that did a mistake. So our test class needs to be ready for that. How to be ready for that? When this pass and there is no exception, what will happen that the next line will be executed. So we can force that if the next line gets executed, that we fail the test class. And that we can do with Assert.fail. And we say here, expected. Let me get the error message instead of writing it. So I can say here that we expected error for missing product ID. So here I'm saying if this path and didn't throw an error, then this line will be executed. And here I'm forcing test method to fail. So that's very, very important. Let's try it. You remember when we executed this and we have the product ID hard-coded, it passed. Let's try it again. So if I do that, missing product ID, now it will fail. It will tell in the error that the assertion failed here. And it tells me like expected an error for missing product ID. So it's telling the user or the developer after he did this change and he tried to run the test method that what you did here is wrong because we were expecting an exception. So it's very, very important to think about it. Like when you want to test like invalid input like that, and you want to test that there is an exception, you have to do it in a try and a catch. Otherwise, the test scenario will fail, as you saw. So we have to have the try and catch, and in the catch, you do the assertion. And on top of that, you have to make sure that you have the fail. In case it didn't throw an exception, you want to make sure you force it to fail, because that means be careful. You have an assert that failed here, or you are not supposed to go to this line. That means the exception didn't happen and something is wrong. So now, if I do that here, and I do one last time, order utility, the missing product, and I will run it. Yes, sorry. And I will show you. So now it passed because we got the exception and it went to the assert. It didn't go to the fail because we reverted back the change that was done by mistake. So that shows to you how you can do the negative scenarios. Now, is that enough? Let's see. Like if I run all the scenarios here and order utility, and I will run and go to order utility, I find that I have 80% code coverage. And it will tell me that this line and this line is missing. Please, please. I know sometimes people do like this and put it on the same line so they don't have to test this scenario or this exception because we are checking the if statement. So they put it on the same line to be covered. But again, yes, you're increasing your code coverage by doing that, but you're missing the whole point of unit test classes, which is testing and testing different scenarios and extreme cases. So I will leave it to you as extra exercise. We need to implement the scenario 2 for invalid quantity and invalid product ID. Like if product ID is empty and we throw an exception, what will happen? So I will leave it to you. And again, don't worry about this code. I will upload after the session, the code into GitHub, and I will be sharing under the video the GitHub that you can go and get the code from. So you can download it and do the extra 2 cases so you can see how it's working and play with it, try without the fail, try to change the code to a scenario where it won't give you the exception. So you can see it with the same progress we did, like why do we need the try and catch, why we did the fail. And if you have any questions or if something's still like not clear, please let me know and send me a message. I will try my best to get back to you within the week. Otherwise, I'll come ready for you with the answer next session. So that covers mainly what is the positive and negative scenario. Okay, the next one is Test.startTest and stop-test. We want to see how it's used and why we use it and why it's important. We'll see a use case for it now, but you will see another use case for it when we go to asynchronous Apex in the future. So let me open another class that I have ready for you. So I prepared here this method, this class. It's not like actually testing a scenario that we have in the org. Like I'm not testing a specific class or a specific utility. I'm just here. The main purpose for it is to show you like the benefit of using Test.startTest and stop-test. So let me here comment those for you for now so you can see what I mean. And let me as well, I want to see here Apex governor limits. So if we open governor limits, and it's a link that we shared together before, you will see that for the DMLs, for example, you have how many DMLs like in the transaction? You have maximum 150. So if you exceed 150 DML statement, that's a governor limit issue, and it will give you an exception. So let's see the code here. Again, in real life, we'll never ever have an insert within a for loop, But I'm doing this because I didn't want to spend time like before the session writing an insert statement 150 times. So forgive me, this is a bad practice. We'll never ever do that. It's just for the purpose to show you the benefit of start test and stop test. So when you do a DML, there is a counter that Salesforce keep and see how many you consume. So we agreed we have 150 available. So the more you will take, the less is available for you. So here, what will happen after we insert this? Taken will be 1 and available will be 149. So we have 1 taken, 149 available. So when we will run this debug statement, it will tell me how many DML statements I consumed so far. So here it will show me 1, for example. Then with the bad practice here, we are running this 150 times. So the first time a contact will be inserted within this for loop will be 2 taken because I have already 1. We keep incrementing its same counter. So I would do 2, 3, so on until when I'm in the one, like not the last one, the one before, I will have 150 the count because I have 1. And then the last contact, I will be consumed when I insert the 150th contact here. I be consumed 151 because the 150 contact here in the loop and 1 at the top. So what will happen here? An exception will be thrown to us. It's unhandled exception. It's a governor limit exception. And the rest of code after this will be ignored. So that means no other debug statements, nothing will be executed. So let's see it together. Here, I would run this one and see it together, how it will fail. It's running the test method we just selected that we run the 150 times. And if we see the error, it will tell you like you have too many DML statements. And if we open the debug log here, you'll find that if we do debug only the first debug statement is the one that got executed, nothing else. So that tells you like it's same counter and it's keep adding to it. So someone will tell me, okay, yeah, the problem is that you have this one here. Yes, for this scenario, you're right. We are not supposed to do this. We can have a list and insert it all together, but I'm just showing you the benefit of start test and end test. If I do now the same scenario with start test and end test, I want to show you the output first and if it will throw an exception or not, and then I will come back and explain why. So let's go here and I would say governor limit, demo test, yeah, this one. And I will run it. We'll see if it will give us like any exception or not. Now it succeeded. Like in the debug statement, we see 3 debug statements. We'll understand why those numbers, why 150 and 2. And then with the tests that we just executed, you'll find that it succeeded instead of being a failure. So what happened? What did start test and stop test do? What start test and stop test did that it isolates the line of codes that you are executing within the start and stop test from anything before the start test and anything after the stop test. And it has its own governor limits. It has its own numbers because we want to mimic the real life. Like in real life, if I'm calling order utility to create an order, this will happen when the user click a button and the transaction will start. So we want to mimic the same, like as if here we are saying start a new transaction for these line of codes. So they will have their numbers and their counts and their limits. So what happened is here, this is as if like taken like counter 1, it's 2 different counters now, and counter 1 counted 1 available, 1 taken and 149. Then here, what will happen? when we hit like the start test here, like counter to started. So we started another counter for the line of codes we have here. So what will happen here, we'll start, instead of counting 2, 3, counter 2 started with 0 because we reset the counter for it. It's all the governor limits are reset for these lines of codes. So no DML is yet executed. So we'll have 1, 2, 3 until the last 150th contact will be 150. And again, because no exception, we don't hit a governor limit. So here, when we will print the number, it will print that we have taken 150. Here, like this started the counter too. Like after the stop, this will end and counter two. So this transaction ended, the governor limits, everything for this, we forget about it. Like it happened within the start and stop and it's gone. So here, when we tried another insert contact, this is taken counting or adding to the counter 1, the first one. So the one that is before the start test. So this as if it's different, like it's not there. We run it with its own numbers, its own governor limits, but before and after they share the same limits, same counter. So that's why you will see that first line show to me. Let me put it next to it. Okay, so here we show the first one, like it's showing counter 1 because we used 1. Then the second one is giving me that we have 150 because we consumed 150 within this for loop, which is bad practice. Then after we ended the counter 2 by ending the stop test, we resumed here adding another contact. So that will consume from counter 1. So when we print how many DMLs we consumed, it will be 2 in that case. So that's the benefit of start test and stop test. It isolates the code that we run at the start and at the end of the start test to run it in its own, like as if its own transaction, its own like governor limits. So it's not impacted with whatever logic we have before or after. Why do we need this? Like in real life scenarios, again, creating the data for testing test classes, sometimes it's very like heavy, like we have a lot of contacts to create, accounts to create, and like product and price book and quote and order and contract. Like we can have a heavy data model that we want to create, and some of them like can be triggering triggers and running other DMLs for us. So we may consume a good chunk of like number of DMLs that we need for our transaction before starting the testing. So that's why like we would be preparing the data, running all the data model, all the test preparation we need. Then we hit the start test, which will reset the governor limits for us, do the code we want to test, end it, and then continue. So we isolate it and we reset it. So we don't hit the limit. And believe me, like you may be thinking, oh, this is a like very like unrealistic. We will never hit it. We are fine. We don't need it. No, you will need it. I faced it a lot. Like we had this a lot in different like scenarios and different like governor limits. And again, it's sometimes because of like the preparation we need, it's heavy, plus the data or the like the method or the functionality we want to test, it's heavy on its own. So sometimes if you mix the data preparation with the code you are trying to test, it's too much and then you can hit the limit. So it's something like you need to think about, that you need preferably to always have your start and stop test when you are testing your code in the test class to make sure it's isolated, has its own governor limits. So if we scan quickly like the slides, and I don't see questions as well, so we are good. The start and stop test will isolate you like your coding scenarios, like the testing scenarios you are doing, where to set the governor limits as we saw, and that help you simulate like real life scenarios boundaries. Because again, as I said, like the start test as if you're starting the transaction of the action you want to do, and in real life, like the transaction really will happen when the user click the button and you call the same function we are trying, for example, to call in our test class. So, and it won't have data preparation before or like like queries or anything after. So we are simulating the real life scenario as well. That's one way or one benefit of the test, start test and stop test. There is another benefit or a need to use it when we are working with asynchronous Apex, but I will keep this for future sessions. We didn't explain yet asynchronous Apex classes, ways like future methods, batch jobs, scheduler, queuable, and all of those. So that will be a different conversation that we want to do. For now, just keep an eye that the key points you want to do, that we are using start test and stop test methods around the code we are trying to test, the functionality we are trying to test, and any setup or data preparation outside the block, like outside the start test or after the stop test doesn't count, and they have their own governor limits, and their limits will be reset between the start and stop test. So that's the main thing that we want to keep an eye on. The next topic, it's useful, but as I said, like it's a bit advanced. So we'll try to go through it like with a simple example. And later on, like we can, if it's not clear or if you need further examples or different scenarios to show you why we need it and why it's useful, we can schedule it in the future again. But for now, like I had a question. Last time we were talking about like when we are writing the test data factory, for example, we did insert like create accounts, multiple account contacts, test contact, like we had different methods. And we said like we usually want to prepare our data and we want to have our data created for our test scenarios because we don't want to rely on the data in the org. And we agreed as well, regardless if like you're creating your data in the method, test method, or in the test setup or in test data factory, that after your test is done, that will be rolled back, no issues. And it's not impacting like your real org data. So there was a question, what about users? And that they like, do we use the users we have in the org? Like the test methods, if we try now, like for example, here, I will try here, I will do this for you to see it. I will query, for example, admin user. I will query like get the profile for an admin, and I'll query a admin user, and I'll check is it like here in my test class, I created an admin user as well, but I want to see if it will be the same or not. So let's try it. If I try to run it, this time, like when I ran this, okay, this time it failed because it will tell me, for example, that the email that is returned is Sally Silky, and it's not like this simple admin that we have here. So so what happened here that without exposing the org data, we can use the users in the org. So that means like I was able to get this user, the admin user, my user. But do we want to do that? Do we want to rely whenever we need users to rely on users created or exist in the org? The answer is no. Why? Because you may get this user and it fails your scenario because let's say it was inactive, or we like change the email of the user and you are waiting and expecting a specific user with specific email. So it's a very bad idea, even with users, to rely on data in the org. So what do? We can create the same way, like we are creating testing data, like creating contacts, creating accounts. We can create as well users. So let me here open Test Data Factory, and I will create two public static user, create standard user, and I can create another one for admin. And we can move the code we have there here to be clean. So let's take it. Let me go here, and I'll take this one. And I will do here, this is standard user. So I'm getting the standard user profile and setting like a first name, last name, email, user, and all the details. And I will return this user. Return test standard user. So we can do that. So why we do it here? Again, it's better for reusability, so we can reuse it over and over again in different test classes. So I can do here test data factory. Let's do this, sorry. So I remove the profile, I don't need it. For this one, I'll do like this. Test data factory dot, and I get here create standard user. So we created a user, and here I will create another one for the admin. So I will take the second portion that we have here. I will put it here, and I will return test admin user. And in real life, you can play with the parameters you want to pass. Maybe you will pass the username, you want to pass anything. It's up to you. And again, I will clean here the profile, and I will do here dot create admin. So I created two admin, one admin, sorry, and one standard user. And after that, I will insert them. Again, in our scenario, like I'm just showing to you, like when I will run it, it's better not to do this because that can get my user instead of the one we want. So what we can do is instead, like I can do like this. I can query like based on email that we know that we created the user with, or the username that we created with. So I will do that, and let me run it for you now. That's to answer one portion of the question. Like when we create users, because we cannot delete users, so the question was, will the users we create will be rolled back? So here this passed it now because I got the email, and the email is the one that we just created when we created the standard and the admin user. If I go to my users and refresh, you won't find this user created. So it will behave the same as if you are creating account, contacts, or custom objects. It will be rolled back. So that's not an issue. Okay, so that's to answer the question, like what happened with test classes when we create users. So I just demonstrated for you, you can create users and they will be rolled back. The other portion of it, we want to learn about System.runAs and how it will work. System.runAs help you decide, because when you run the test class, like as we did now, it will run with my user because I'm the one who is executing. So if you have a continuous integration that is deploying your code, the test classes will run as this user. If someone else is trying to run the test class, it will run as their user. So if I'm an admin, system admin, it will run as a system admin. But what if I have something in the code that needs like to check specific permission sets, specific profile, and or the code will behave like differently between an admin and, for example, a standard user. So let's say here I have a sample class. I just, again, for the sake of the demo and the idea of run-as, I just created the method for you. So you have here create restricted account. We pass the account, and then it, or like even, let's do it differently. Like I can take the account name. So we can pass the account name to this one instead of account. So string account name. I will pass a name to create it with. So if the profile that is like the user logged in, the user is running now, I get the profile ID and I check is it equal or not to the system admin. If it's not equal to the system admin, I want to give an exception that you cannot execute or create the account. Otherwise, I will create here a new account with the name passed, and I will insert it and return it's void. So we are not returning anything. So that means here admins only are allowed to use this method, because if the logged in user is not an admin, we return an exception. So when you test this in test classes, if, for example, I go now here and say, okay, instead of that, I commented temporary, I would say, okay, I want to test account service dot create restricted account, and here test Thursday. Here, when we execute this test method, when we come here to this line of code, will I be an admin or non-admin? The answer would be an admin, because I'm an admin in my org, and it would run. If I do here new run and I do account service test, it will run as my user. So my user is an admin. So the point is, I want to test this again. Like if we think about positive and negative scenarios, so positive will be run the method with an admin, and account will be created. I want to test the negative. We said we have to think about negative too. Negative, run the method with a non-admin user, and we should get the exception. So that's what we are trying to do. How can we do this with our test methods? We want to run it once with an admin and once with a non-admin for the negative scenario. So for the positive, it will be our scenario here. What we do is, as we did, like first, I don't want to rely on the users in my org. So that's why we created an admin and a standard user here. And then I will go get the admin that we just created. This is just an extra step for me to make sure that we are checking it. And then after that, we will use something called System.runAs. System.runAs, the syntax for it, I have to say run as which user. So I have to specify here between the brackets which user. So that's why I'm selecting the user that we want to run it as. And in this case, I'm getting the admin because I'm in the positive scenario. So I'm saying I want to run some code as the admin. So what will happen here? Anything between the curly brackets will forget about my user and will behave or will run with this user. So if this is a standard user, it will run as a standard user. Without the run as, anything I will run as mine. So without the run as, account service.create was running as my user. So in that case, I want to move it with the run as, so it will run as the admin. So what will happen here? This is a positive scenario, so it will execute, and we are expecting that no exception will happen, and we will get the account that got created. So we'll query the account and do an assert as well. So when we do that, so I will create here, and let's say here the name for it. I will name it the same name. So I wanted to get the account that got created with this name, and I'm doing an assert to check that it ran correctly and we got the account and the account got inserted. And that would be expected because we are running this as an admin user, so it will run with no issues. So let's try it together. And let's see. So now this one got executed correctly, no issues. Admin can create account, ran successfully. So that's the positive scenario. We want to do the negative. So the negative in that scenario, let me get the method name. So again, I will have a test method and I will name it test account restricted. And then instead of getting an admin, I will get a standard user. Like we created in the test setup an admin and a standard user. So now I'm getting the user that got created as a standard user. So if, again, I've run it, like if I do account.create account restricted, it will run as my admin, not the standard user that we got. So I have to use run as system.runAs. And in this case, I will specify that it's running as the standard user we just got. And I move this here. Now, when I will run this, what will happen? When I will run this, it will come. It's not an admin, so we'll get an exception, a DML exception. Let's see it together. And that's something we are expecting. We want it to happen. But we are missing something here to handle the negative scenario properly. So here, let me expand this. So now it failed. And the failure in the restriction, and it says the error message that we are expecting only system admin are allowed to create contacts. So the negative scenario got executed right, and the exception we are expecting is right, but the way we are handling it here is wrong. We said with the negative scenarios, we do a try and a catch. And here we are catching, we are expecting a DML exception. So I will do a catch for DML. And we said, I will move this in the try because I'm expecting it to give me an exception. And we have to make sure it will fail if we reach this line, because I know, or it should throw an exception. So in that case, we'll use Assert.fail to force it to fail if it passed and no exception were thrown, as we did with the positive and negative. And here we'll assert to make sure that the exception that we expecting happened in the catch. So let's try it. New run. And I will run here. So now it passed. Like the negative scenario passed. The expectation from me from the negative is to have an exception. So I did the try and catch, and the catch has the assert passed and everything is good. If it didn't throw an exception, that's where we should have failed it. So that's again an example to show you without the run as, I wouldn't be able to run this negative scenario, because if I run the scenario or the task class as is, it will run always as my user, which is an admin. But I want here to simulate it. And it's a good idea. The more you are comfortable with testing in unit test classes, I would encourage you to think about it, because it helps you to cover wider range of scenarios and to be able to test like if there is certain permission sets or certain values are passed. So it gives you more control on what scenarios you can run. So this is how the run as work and how we demonstrate it together. When you create a user, it will roll back. So users as if other data will roll back at the end of the test class. And the run as will give you a benefit of running the code that you want to test with like different users. Okay, so no questions so far. So I think we are good. We saw how like we I'm trying to incorporate what we learned. Like here we saw the test setup. We saw together creating test data factory method, and we used it. We saw how we can do negative and positive scenarios, how to think about it, how the try and catch is important with the negative, how the fail is important with the negative. The thing that we didn't include is where how to do the start test and stop test to reset the governor limits. So that would be here within the curly brackets of run as. After switching the context user, we'll do the test.start test here. And at the end, we'll do the stop test as well to stop the testing. And let's try it one more time. So let's run it and execute it. And let's see the result of the test. What happened here? Let me move it up a bit. And it passed. So everything passed, the positive and negative scenario. So that conclude like the also like what I wanted to cover with the run as, but let's run quickly through the slides. So the run as is used to simulate running Apex as we saw with different profiles, different permission sets. So like we can have different users, you can set up different like standard user with different permissions and try different scenarios. So it helps you like if you want to check some security, some different behavior, some validations that is different based on the user, you can do that still with your test classes. And that helps you cover like a wider range of scenarios and negative and positive scenarios with different users, different use cases. And that's a good idea because sometimes I know QA is supposed to remember not to test with an admin, but it happens sometimes some QAs like forget to do this step, and sometimes they tend to test with the system admin. So at least if this happened by mistake, you are in safe spot if you do the run as and you run it as the user you want, not relying on the users in the org as well. So any DMLs within the run as, it will run with the user permission, and it will be as this user and any code as well. And the run as is available for test methods only. And as we saw, it helps like differentiate with the different profiles and permissions. So that's the benefit of it. So happily, like we are done what I wanted to cover and more regarding unit test classes for beginners. And if you have any questions, please reach out. It's very important to understand all these concepts. The takeaways are all what we covered, like when we like revisited them while we are talking today. Unit test classes are very important. Don't think about it for code coverage only. Think about it like to really, really test your scenarios, really test your code, be there for you to do regression if someone else by mistake did a change, like the one we did. Instead of the exception, we hard-coded the value. If you don't have proper asserts and proper testing, your test class may pass still, but like we want to catch such scenarios. So it's very important to do it. Don't focus on the code coverage. The more you will do it nicely and you will cover different scenarios, that will happen like as well. The code coverage will be increased at the same time. Best practices, think about test setup, think about like test data factory for reusability as we saw, think about testing bulk as we did last session with the triggers, test negative scenarios, remember to fail if we don't get the exception to make sure you are covered if the exception is not thrown anymore for any reason that you failed the test method. So it's very, very important to test all of that. The start and stop test, we saw one use case for it today, which is resetting the governor limits. So we want to keep doing that. And some of the advanced like scenarios that we will cover later in the future will be how we can load data. Like we don't have to keep loading data or creating data only in Test Data Factory. Sometimes people use CSV files. So we'll cover that later. Also, when we cover the integration portion and the APIs, we cannot consume endpoints and APIs in the test class. So we'll have to mock the data that will return from the API call. So that's something else we want to cover. We'll test asynchronous Apex, future methods, batch jobs, queuable, schedulable, and queuable as well. So we'll see with the asynchronous Apex when we cover them, how we test them as well. So there is still bits and pieces of test classes that we didn't cover in the beginner session, but I think we have more than enough. I would encourage you to go back even for the for the utility classes we did in the previous sessions, to write something, to run through the Trailhead modules and run like any test classes modules related, work with it. The more you practice how to think about positive and negative and different scenarios and the testing and how to prepare the data run, follow the steps like is test, and then prepare the data, then execute the code that you want to test, then the asserts and how you do this, and the start test and stop test, and all of this, and how to think about the negative scenario. This will come more with practice. So I would encourage you to do that as well. We shared before, like last session, this scenario. So I have it here on the screen. You can take a screenshot for it and you can work on it. It's just to create a custom object, simple with simple fields, and write a trigger for it to do specific functionality for you. And then after that, we want definitely write the trigger handler so that like tie together the previous topic we discussed, which is triggers, with the test classes, and then write test classes. We want negative scenario, positive scenario. We want to do bulk testing because we are testing a trigger. So go through it, try it. If you have questions, let me know. Just some hints. Consider using test setup and test data factory. Run your test classes the way you want. In developer console, in Visual Studio Code, we discussed different ways to run them. Check the coverage, see which lines are not covered, see how you can increase the code coverage by testing more scenarios, different use cases, and don't just focus on code coverage. We want code coverage plus assert statements to make sure that the code is working fine. Don't rely on the data in the org. Create your data and set up your data for testing. I hope the sessions for the test classes was useful for you and you enjoyed it. And I hope to see you next Thursday in a new session with Code with Sally, a new topic. We'll be still in the beginners series. So stay tuned. And if you have any questions, let me know, please. And sometimes people are shy to ask questions. This is a safe environment. Even if you don't want to be on camera or to record your questions, I can send it to me offline, or I can pause the recording and you ask your question and then we record again, or I can cut it in the, after the session before uploading it to YouTube. But again, I want you to know that asking questions is the main part of this session because it helps us think together, learn together. I may not have all the answers. I learned something new. Someone else may have your questions, so don't feel shy. Please ask your questions the way you want, but don't keep it inside of you because I'm here to help you and I want you to succeed and learn Apex and development and love it. It's very enjoyable, but don't waste the opportunity by keeping the questions and not asking them. Again, thank you for anyone who attended the session today and for anyone who's watching the session online, and I will see you next Thursday. Thank you so much and have a great day.